For all those that are in the attendee waiting room, I see you there. There's 16 of you right now. Jordan, who is also from the Department of Agriculture, is joining as a panelist. And then we're waiting for Mara from Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. She'll be the one who leads the conversation when she joins us. But we're still growing. We got 21 now, so I'm going to go back onto mute. But just wanted to let people know that are in the waiting room. You are there. We can't see you, but you could see us. And if somebody has a question, Mara will probably outline that during the presentation. Either we can identify you by raising your hand, and I can allow you to talk to ask the question, or we might be able to just write questions in the chat or the Q&A portion. And it looks like Mara's joining us right now, so I'll go back to being quiet.
Thanks, Scott, and I'll be happy to do a quick introduction here when we hit the 1 o'clock mark. All right, well, welcome everybody. It's 1 o'clock. I'm just gonna do some quick introductions, and I'm sure we'll have a few other people that are joining us in the next few minutes. To start, my name is Jordan Beasley. I'm the Policy Advisor and Legislative Liaison at the Colorado Department of Agriculture. I just wanna welcome all of you and thank you for attending today. The purpose of today's call is to go over the guidance for outdoor events that was issued by the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment yesterday. And to that end, we have Mara from CDPHE, who's on the line, who will go through that new guidance. And we also have Scott, who's the State Fair General Manager, who will talk just briefly about how the State Fair is implementing some of this guidance at the State Fair this summer, to give all of you a little bit of context on how this guidance might fit into all of your work. With that, as we're going through this, I believe all of you are muted for during the presentation. However, if you have questions, you can either use the chat box and type in the questions there, or you can raise your hand, and Scott has the control on those, and so we can call on you at the end and answer your questions then. So with that, I'd like to first turn it over to Mara to introduce herself and give a brief overview of the guidance.
Thanks, Jordan. Hi, everybody. Mara Brosi-Witchar with CDPHE. I know that I do not have my video on, and I apologize for that. I have a new computer, and I haven't figured out how to switch the video, and that is very silly, but at this point in time, you're just going to have my name, and my sincere apologies. Thank you for jumping on the phone. We understand that as we move forward with outdoor events and indoor events, there might be quite a bit of confusion as to what this means for our county fairs and how we can move forward with hosting events in our current COVID-19 world. I want to start with just a little bit of level setting. You've heard, I think, the governor say, this is a marathon, not a sprint. That as we are looking at COVID-19, both recovery and resiliency, that we are still just a few steps ahead of this virus, and we are trying to keep ahead of this virus, which is why we are opening things slowly and measured. That's really frustrating. We understand from people who are being told no all of the time. But with taking this measured approach, we are able to open the state up in a really deliberate manner. Now, we've had a lot of feedback that sometimes the choices that we've made of things to open and at what level we've chosen to open has been frustrating because it hasn't always been really transparent as to how we got to those numbers. We recognize that and establish that. You know, as the state public health department, we are dealing with the once in a lifetime, once in a 100-year pandemic, the likes that none of us have dealt with before. And sometimes we are able to make decisions quickly and efficiently and look back and have complete confidence in them. And others, we are trying to do this with the most scientific-based approach, with the most policy intent, and we're still trying to, stepping over ourselves as we make those decisions. So we really appreciate everybody's both patience and grace as we go through these processes. So thank you very much ahead of time. I did want to quickly review the outdoor events and how that pertains to fairs and what that looks like. And then answer any questions that you all might have as how that guidance applies to you all currently. So I'm going to try to share my screen here. Give me 2 seconds. And you will see that I have, make that bigger, our outdoor guidance up. And I just want to be able to look through it and chat about how these things might apply to county fairs. So there's been a lot of discussion right now, specifically about calculating the capacity for square footage of usable space using our social distancing space calculator, which I'm just going to go to really quick and bring up. We've talked all the time about maintaining a 6-foot distance around people. We are really trying to show that instead of a 6-foot distance, it really needs to be a 12-foot grid, so that way people can pass and maintain distance at all time. If nobody moves from 6 feet, then it's very easy to maintain a 6-foot distance. That's not applicable in real life, very non-applicable in a fair setting, which is why we're using the calculator based off of a 12-foot grid. So that way people can pass and continue to maintain a 6-foot distance from individuals. So if you're trying to calculate what that means for your space, we ask that you put in the total square footage of space, and then we're trying for you to really be realistic at how much of that square footage of space is taken up by floor objects. This includes your booths, your restrooms, your displays, things of that nature should be taken into account of how much of that square footage space is occupied. So if we were to take 1,000 square feet of space, and let's say that it's at 25%, that max number, that max number of people that you would have would be 5. Now, that's only based of 1,000 square feet of space, and much of that square footage of space being covered by a table or something. Let's go to a more realistic number for fairs. And so if we're looking at the 12,000 square feet of space, which I think is still very small for a facility, and you had about 25% covered, that then calculates to 63 people would be the maximum number of individuals. If people have questions on the calculator, happy to go back and talk with that a little bit more as well. I'm going back now to our outdoor events. We do have a maximum number of 175 per designated activity. There's been a lot of questions of what does that per designated activity actually mean. What we're looking for is that if you have 175 people that in the, I think it calculates to 22,000 square feet of space, excuse me, is that maximum number that you are able to, for those 175 people in that designated area, show that they have both an exit and an entrance from that area, as well as easily accessible facilities. So both restrooms and hand washing stations. This way, you are able to break up your activities that are happening at a fair per square footage, or the amount of people that would be allowed in there. We're hoping that this gives people opportunities to get creative as to how they're delineating their space as we're looking at these outdoor events. I imagine that there's going to be some follow-up questions on this specifically, and happy to answer that more in depth as we move forward. A few other things that I just want to highlight with these conversations is specifically our performers and competitors language. There's been a lot of conversation as to why we're looking at a 25 feet of distance from patrons that performers/competitors need to keep at all times. Part of that is because of the aerosolizing nature of COVID-19. Performers where they're singing and or dancing and with sweat exertion, saxophone players and the such, we want to make sure that there's no chance that there would be for those fluids to be shared with a patron at that point, which is why we're asking for 25 feet of distance, and that comes from JAMBA guidelines for performers or competitors. This is where it gets tricky, right? When you're talking about competitors that might be such as bull riding or are using an arena for a rodeo, we are asking that you still keep that 25 feet of distance from the arena of where the performer might be. Again, sweat, huffing and puffing, that kind of sort of thing. We are trying to make sure that we're keeping segregated cohorts. We are encouraging everybody to really make sure that if the people that you invite into Colorado and into the space, that they are really aware of what sort of close contact they've had with anybody who might have had COVID-19. You know, this goes for everybody, but especially for those conversations that we're having with our vendors, that if they've been in close contact with any individual with COVID-19, and that means people who have, and by close contacts, that is less than 6 feet of distance for longer than 15 minutes, then they really should not be participating at that time, that they should be self-quarantining. Other things that I do want to highlight before we get into question and answers are our booth and vendors space at events. And so you'll find that to the right of your screen. This is guidance directly that we took from Farmers Market guidance. And so this is pretty standardized language for booths and for outside vendors. We want to make sure that people are being safe while also enjoying the fair as much as possible. So happy to answer any questions that you have about those as well. At this time, I know that I speak fast and talk a lot, and would be happy to answer any questions or concerns you all have, and help answer some of the outlying concerns.
And Mara, this is Jordan. There's a couple of questions that popped up in the chat, and I'll just read those out if you want. The first one is, what if multiple activities share restroom facilities? For example, 4 barns utilize one central restroom.
That would then be designated as one activity then. And so if we understand that there might be multiple facilities, or one facility that had been used for the area, if we're going to be defining separate activities within a very large space, so that way you can maximize the amount of people available at the fair, really, again, we're looking for an exit or an entrance that is specific to that activity, as well as facilities.
There's another question that asks, is the indoor and outdoor use calculator the same?
Yes, it is. The major difference between indoor and outdoor is the capacity limit. So for outdoor events, the maximum capacity limit is 175 people. And for indoor, it's only 100.
Great. There's another question as well, which is, can you elaborate on the performers are not included in capacity limits? Does this mean our livestock members showing their animals do not count towards the maximum number at the activity?
It's a really great question and something that we want to clarify for you all. We have heard, in previous guidance that we have put out, we have really made it that the capacity limits are for patrons or athletes who are participating in the event, and therefore coaches or referees or umpires who are watching the event or have safety reasons are not included in that capacity limit. Therefore, also your overall capacity of, let's call it 100 people in an arena, is for the seating capacity, and the performers that are performing in the arena would be outside of that. Now, if the flag team, after their performance, wanted to go and sit with the other individuals in the audience, they would then need to be counted within your capacity limits.
Thank you. Next question is, would a horse or a livestock show fall under the indoor event, as it would primarily be in a barn or an indoor arena? Or would it be considered an outdoor event, as oftentimes those folks are moving between parking lots and in between barns?
I think that depends on the arena that you will be presenting in. If the arena has a roof but open walls and I'm trying to think of one really quickly off the top of my head in Colorado, and it's not coming to me, that has a roof but open walls and a open air, then that would be considered an outdoor. If it is closed, such as the Western Stock Show arena, the main arena, that would be therefore an indoor event.
Great.
And these decisions are based specifically on ventilation. And so we know that with outside with better ventilation, that the virus has less chance of being contracted as opposed to a room with not as sufficient of ventilation.
The next question is, do youth showing animals and judges, et cetera, need to wear masks while they're in the arena?
So we're asking that right now, that we are encouraging all of performers to use masks when not performing. And so if they were coming in, you would have a mask on, enter the arena to show with your mask off, and then after you are done competing, put the mask back on.
Thank you. Next question is actually a good question that I was thinking about in my own mind here, but is there a performer capacity if there are no spectators? For example, a livestock show may not be open to the public, but have 200 exhibitors, for example.
That's a really great call. That capacity limit would be based on the capacity of where they are showing those animals. So the performer capacity, again, trying to separate them, the performers are performing in the arena itself, obviously not the seating capacity. So the capacity that you would be looking at is the arena and what that looks like.
Thanks. Next one is asking for a little clarification on, if you have an outdoor rodeo, can you have 175 spectators in the stands, assuming that it's the maximum size, and say 175 people putting on the rodeo, including the contestants?
Where our guidelines sit now, that would be correct. I think that that is not the intent. We are trying to make sure that the 175 people that you would be putting on the rodeo to be all in the same space of the other 175 people in that space at the same time would be challenging. But I also appreciate your question, and that's something that we should take back to get clarified, because I'm not sure if I have the correct answer to that. So.
Thanks. The next question is, are there any limitations to trailer parking spacing, and how many trailers can be spaced in a given area, say 150 acres, with families working off the trailers and only going into the arena to show and then back to their trailers?
So with trailer parking space, I would also say that that would be based off of a 12-foot grid radius as much as possible. And so while planning out who can be, where to be parked in your planning documents, that should be brought into consideration.
Thank you. Next question is there a maximum number of separate venues that one fairgrounds can have?
Excellent question, Scott. And no, there is not. That is based on your fairgrounds and what your space looks like.
Great. For junior livestock shows, do the auctioneers and ringmen count in the capacity limits, or are they considered performers?
Because junior livestock sales are, I believe, covered under essential services due to food chain, those are actually outside of this guidance, which only makes my answer more complicated, and I apologize. But no, they would not count in the capacity either, because they are essential to the event.
Let's see. I think that's it for the chat, and then there's one question in the Q&A option. So that is back to the answer on livestock show with no spectators. Likely there would be multiple barns, most likely open-sided, housing different species with exhibitors, moving animals in and out of one or more showings. Could be indoor, outdoor, or covered roof, open air. Seems a challenge in clarifying capacity.
I don't deny that. That is challenging to define that capacity. And that's something that we'll have to delve more into as to figuring out that answer. I would agree. There's a lot of, at any county fair or rodeo, horse show and the such, there's a lot of people moving in between spaces. We are trying to move forward with our outdoor guidance in a way that both allows these activities to move forward, but also mitigates the viral spread. One of the many reasons why I wanted to have this call today, and thank you so much to Jordan and Scott for setting it up, was specifically to also see what we needed to tweak in our guidance for fairs. I think that we bring up a lot of really great questions about Melanie's question, for instance, of the hundreds of people spread out throughout barns waiting for their class, might be only 10 people in the ring, but are we basing participant limits based on the arena and show ring size? Could there be therefore unlimited in barns and pens? In perfect honesty, I will need to bring that back and figure out how we apply that with our guidelines. Great.
Thank you. We got a few more chatted in here while we're talking. So let's go to the next question, which is livestock shows many times have hundreds of people spread out throughout the barns waiting for their class. And they may only be 10 people in the ring at a time. So your statement of participant limits based upon arena or show ring size, we could have unlimited in barns and pens?
And again, that is a question that I think that we're going to have to go back and discuss both internally with our policy group and also with CDA as to how we apply the capacity limits with barns and pens. We are aware that viral transmission between animals is very low, if not any, and therefore, social distancing between horses is maybe not necessary, but social distancing between their owners is very much necessary. And so if you had a entire stall aisle full of, different owners' animals, that would be very challenging to then social distance as you are getting them out of the pens and stalls. If you were to block off different, to enforce social distancing in that way, that would be something that we would have to look at.
Next question goes back to the livestock sale question, which is, so what is the maximum number for a livestock sale since it isn't under this guidance?
So that question goes back to CDA because I do not run livestock sales or haven't done guidance for livestock sales.
So on that, as Mara mentioned before, livestock sales are considered part of the essential agricultural activities that were allowed to continue under kind of the initial executive orders and public health orders issued by CDPHE. And so any of those activities would need to follow the same guidance and same standards as essential activities. And we can provide a link to you to that public health order as well.
Jordan, I have to step in real quick. There is a difference between an essential livestock auction and the activities at a 4-H and FFA livestock show and sale. At the top of this document, I believe it refers to these activities as non-essential livestock sales. There is more information out there about that. Sorry, I hate to interrupt, but I just want to make sure nobody gets that confusion, because the junior livestock show and sale is not the same thing as a livestock auction yard, and a livestock auction yard would be essential. 4-H and FFA or any other type of youth market show and sale is not considered essential. It's a non-essential livestock sale.
Great, thank you for that clarification, Scott. I appreciate it. The next question up is, can we seat family units together if they're spaced by the 12-foot grid?
Yes, you can, and encourage you to do so.
Scott answered that next question. So, so the next one is, livestock housing may be double rows of pens with alleys in between. How many pens can be used for, say, 15 pens per row, double-sided? So assume pens are 6 by 6.
I will have to take that back and do the math on that one.
The next question is, how do you calculate square footage for an outdoor venue such as a covered arena that is open-sided, but trailer parking around is extremely spacious?
You could define that, if looking at our guidelines, as 2 different areas, depending on the square footage. And so you could have one defined activity as the trailer parking area and how many people would be allowed in that area versus the arena itself and the square footage calculator for that. Because those would be 2 defined activities.
Right. Next question is, do you think the Protect Our Neighbor guidelines will be in effect by the middle of July? And I think this question goes to folks that are trying to plan events later on this summer.
So real quick with Protect Our Neighbor, as we are looking to moving towards that, I do think we will be in that framework, but just because we are moved to that framework does not necessarily mean that each county will be at the Protect Our Neighbor stage. As we move to phase 3 or Protect Our Neighbor as a state, what happens is that there's a certain level of metrics that counties need to be able to meet in terms of COVID spread, testing supplies, PPE, available beds, and the such, that would then define whether or not they are eligible to be in the Protect Our Neighbor stage of the recovery. If the county that your fair is in is not able to move to Protect Your Neighbor, the county will stay under Safer at Home for the time being.
Great. Next question is, youth showmen normally have a parent help. How do you define exhibitor in the youth show world?
I think that that is a question that we need to continue to figure out, and we'll get back to you on that. See, the next question is, if July outdoor limits are increased to say 500 for eligible counties, and if the counties are qualified, would these guidelines be the same with a max of 500 per venue? As of right now, that is the plan, yes.
Moving through, there's some comments in there, not questions. So, let's see.
The question from Mark, which is so each family unit would count as one, not the number in that unit, correct? No. Each member of that family takes up the occupancy. So you have an occupancy of 50 and 5 different families of varying sizes, that you still would have to have a maximum number of 50 people in there, but family units can be set together and don't need the 6 foot of distance in between them.
Great. Let's see, next question down here. I've heard that an event can ask for a variance. Is this true? And if so, how does an event ask for a variance?
If an event is looking for a variance, they need to reach out to their county commissioners to ask for the county to apply for a variance with the state.
There's another question here in the question and answer piece. How does working with food booths in buildings go?
We're asking them to follow our restaurant guidance and our booth guidance that we have set in our outdoor and indoor events.
Great. Thanks, Mara. And I think now might be a good time to take a quick break from questions and maybe give Scott a chance to just give a quick overview on how the State Fair is looking forward to implementing some of these guidelines while continuing to hold the State Fair this year. And if there's additional questions while he's talking, we can come back to them.
Absolutely, and there's a couple of questions in the Q&A that we'll get to after I kind of give a really brief, unless there's lots of questions for me, on what the Fair Board did on Tuesday, where we are right now, and what our plan is going forward. On Tuesday, the Fair Board made a decision based on the reality of what 2020 is, to essentially cancel all parts of the State Fair except for the 4-H and FFA programs. Really putting a focus on the 4-H and FFA market show. There's the 4-H and FFA, the FFA, long week. The 4-H horse show, dog show, some static exhibits, rocketry, and a few other programs that are really revolving around youth. Looking at the guidelines that we're talking about here today, we're down to that core right now, knowing that that's our priority. So we're going to build out our plan and try and accommodate as many 4-H and FFA kids that we can have at the fair, with all the facilities on the ground now being available. As we get closer into late July and even into August, we'll have a better idea of how our plan looks compared to the current health situation in Pueblo County. And we have the ability to add some things back. We figured it was better just to start from a place of small, because we can't be nimble if we're trying to put on the normal 2020 state fair. So we, like I said, we stripped it down to pretty much the bare bones of 4-H and FFA programs. In late July, early August, we may add back a few things, but they would be small things, nothing like you'd be thinking at the state fair. This might be, we might have some parades, because parades are one thing. And Mara, I don't know if you touched on parades, but I think parades are something in this guidelines that are being considered, and there'll be some guidelines to allow for those to happen. We might add back some more food booths, with a plan on how to limit the number of people that can come onto our grounds. And if the numbers get high enough, our carnival has indicated if we are able to get an area or two areas that are separate that get the numbers up to around 1,000, we might be able to bring back in some carnival rides. But there are different amusement guidelines, I believe. Mara, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure there's amusement park guidelines that they would have to follow. So our livestock rules, the board will finalize those. The intent and spirit of the rules will all be the same, but we won't finalize those till the end of July, just to make sure we have our limits in place that are correct, the protocols for public health, to make sure everybody knows what the restrictions are, whether there's face coverings, whether there's social distancing, and the like. So that's where the state fair is at right now. We're small and nimble, and we hope that we're able to add a few things back. But we're also prepared if public health sees data that shows that things are not getting safer, they're actually getting less safe. We're prepared to also contract, and we can do all that from a pretty nimble position right now.
Thanks for providing that update, Scott. And I think there might have been a few questions that I missed in there, Scott. Did you have those?
Oh, on the Q&A? Let's see. And maybe you didn't miss them, but they're highlighted for me. A fair happening in August. Is there a hint as to guidance with protect? Oh, I guess you already talked about that one. So, sorry. All right, never mind. They popped up on my screen.
I think there's.
No, you didn't miss anything. That was me.
I think there was one last question here. So under the future protect your neighbor, will there be a different calculator to reach the 500 number?
So under protect our neighbor, it is just a blanket 50% capacity or 500 people, whichever is fewer.
Thank you, Mara. Oh, go ahead, Scott.
That's per venue, right, Mara? The
Correct.
500 if we get up to protect your neighbor? Okay.
Well, I want to say thank you very much to Mara and Scott for putting this together and presenting today and providing this information to all of you. Before we conclude, I just want to throw out and ask Mara or Scott, what's the best way for folks to get questions answered if they have them after the call today?
Mara, I'll throw this out there first. This video, we're going to post it to the Colorado Fair Association webpage so people can watch it. And maybe if there is an FAQ, Mara, that you want to throw up under that, that might be a good place for people to see fair-specific questions. Just wanted to let you know that platform is there before you gave your full answer.
Thanks, Scott. That's awesome. Yes, we are right now developing, finalizing our FAQ, which quite a few of your questions will hopefully get answered within that FAQ, working with CDA to find the most appropriate answers for those. So we will make sure that that does get posted.
Well, thanks again, everybody, for taking the time this afternoon to listen to this and listen to the update on the outdoor guidance and how that applies to county fairs. Again, thank you for your time. Thanks, Scott. And thanks, Mara.
Thank you.
I'm going to try and copy all the questions in the chat just because I don't have the best account here to save all that stuff. So bear with me. I got them all. There's still 24 people. I don't know if anybody wants to have open dialogue, but I can promote you to speaker if there's anybody that has anything they want to say. Jordan, you can stick around if you want to, but I don't know if there, like I said, if there's anybody in the group still that wants to talk, just put something in the chat and I can give you speaking rights.
Jump off.
Not seeing much of that going. Drop down to 19.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jordan, for helping get this together.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.